Today we will be talking about Smash by the Offspring. The album was released on April 8th, 1994, and it is celebrating 30 years. I will be talking about some of my memories when I first listened to this album. I will discuss the recording process. I'll talk about how this album helped bring punk rock to the mainstream, along with another album that was released a few months before this. I'll talk about how some of the singles were big radio hits. I'll discuss the meaning behind the album cover. I'll talk about the tour, and finally I'll talk about the songs and the meanings behind them. First, some background on the album. This is their third studio album as well as their breakout album. This was the follow-up to their album Ignition from 1992. This was also the last album to be produced by Tom Wilson, who had produced their first two albums. I remember when this came out back in 1994, I was listening to a lot of grunge and alternative. I think that was my main genre at the time, as I was not listening to a lot of metal at this time. I remember this album because it came out right around the time I was graduating from college. My first job out of college was a sales job that had me doing a lot of driving, so I was listening to a lot of alternative radio. If my memory serves me correctly, I was listening to 92.3 K-Rock at the time. I remember hearing Come Out and Play, and I remember that the chorus where they said, you've got to keep them separated, was just very catchy.
You gotta keep them separated.
I eventually bought this album on cassette, and I used to play it all the time. This was one of the two albums that got me into punk rock, as the other one was Dookie by Green Day. To date, I've never been a big punk rock fan, but The Offspring and Green Day will always be my favorites. And that is due to them releasing two awesome albums a little over a month apart. Let's talk about the recording process. The album came out after they toured for the album Ignition. They started to write material around the middle of 1993. They recorded the album during the first 2 months of 1994 at Track Record in North Hollywood. They didn't expect this album to be big because their last album only sold about 15,000 copies. So being on mainstream radio didn't even cross their mind. The album had a small budget of $20,000, but they eventually were able to get it finished for the April release date. I mentioned before how Green Day released Dookie a few months prior.
I am one of those melodramatic fools.
It's hard to say if Green Day helped open doors for this band, but they were most likely a factor. The big radio hit was Come Out and Play, which was number one on Billboard's Modern Rock Tracks. Then they released another single, Self-Esteem, that hit number 4 on the same chart. There was another single, Gotta Get Away, that reached number 6 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart. I don't really remember listening to that one on the radio, but it's a good song. I will talk about all of these songs later in more detail. The album cover is very iconic. It shows a skeleton in some sort of X-ray image. The three singles that I mentioned also had their own cover with a skeleton, as you can see in these photos. The songs on the album speak of topics like greed, suicide, violence, addiction, and abuse. The skeleton is supposed to represent death, which is the end result of these topics that I mentioned. Now let's talk about the tour. The first leg of the tour took place in May and June of 1994. They played with other punk rock bands, SNFU, Battery Club, and Pennywise. Afterwards, the album got very big and they were offered the opening slot on big arena tours. They were asked to open for Stone Temple Pilots and Metallica, but they turned it down because they wanted to play the small clubs. Eventually, they played some bigger shows overseas in Europe, Australia, and Japan. They even played the album in full for the 20th anniversary back in 2014. Let's talk about the songs now. They opened the album with a short 30-second comedy skit called Time to Relax. It's just a voice telling you to sit down, put on the CD, kick off your shoes and relax. Just a little fun track. The first real song is called Nitro, Youth Energy. The song is about how generations viewed the world. In the chorus, they sing There's No Tomorrow, which infers that this generation was not very optimistic about the future. They also talk about living under the gun every day and how you never know when you're going to go. So that was the main idea behind this song. The next song is called Bad Habit, and this is a song about road rage. It's just a very angsty punk rock song that many people could relate to. It's a fun song to listen to while driving, and I remember this because I used to listen to this album in my cassette deck in my car. Then there's the song Gotta Get Away. This was the third single, and this song is about a person who is paranoid. They had a music video for this, and it talks about a guy who is sitting on his bed. He is wide awake. He talks about the demons in his head. And that's something that was very relatable to the people who listened to this album. The next one was called Genocide, and from what I understand with the lyrics, they mentioned a dog-eat-dog world throughout the song. So it's my understanding is about like how we live in a dog-eat-dog world where everybody is out for themselves. So in the song, he sings, Hope You Like My Genocide, which I understand that as somebody who is very successful, who doesn't mind seeing people exploited. After this is a song called Something to Believe In. This is the idea that we want to have some more optimistic feelings. In the chorus, he's saying something to believe in repeatedly. The song is from the perspective of somebody who has a very pessimistic outlook on life and is looking for something to believe in. Now we have the big song Come Out and Play. I think one of the reasons this is a great song is because it doesn't sound like a generic punk rock song. It has that Middle Eastern guitar riff. I think that made it stand out amongst the other punk rock songs, which were mostly just strumming guitar chords. But this song is about violence in schools. But when he came up with a line, keep them separated, he said he got it from a chemistry experience when he was cooling Erlenmeyer flasks that were full of hot liquids while he was in college. And by the way, Dexter Holland had a PhD in molecular biology, and he was awarded it back in 2017 when he went back to school. So that is pretty cool. The next other big song is called Self-Esteem. I remember this one very well. I used to sing along to it in my car. I would probably recite the lyrics to it. I probably know it even today. Basically, it's a true story about Dexter Holland, and it's about being in either a toxic relationship or one he really doesn't want to be in, but he doesn't have enough confidence to get out of it. And every time he wants to break up with his girl, she finds a way to get back with him. So that's why he says he's a sucker with no self-esteem. After this, the album takes a dip with about 6 more album cuts, but they're still good, but they're just not as memorable as the front half on the album. But let's discuss them. It'll Be a Long Time is a punk rocker with a pessimistic point of view about people never waking up to the corruption in society. Killboy Powerhead is the one and only cover song on the album. It was originally performed by the Digits. What Happened to You is one of those reggae-sounding songs that punk bands like The Clash used to do. This one has a fun and bouncy beat. The song is from the point of view of someone speaking to another person with a drug problem. So Alone is an old-school punk rocker with a descending guitar riff that reminded me a lot of Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love. I'm Not the One is an old-school punk rocker about how one generation sets up the world for the next one to live in. The album ends with a title track, which is 10 minutes long and contains 3 songs in one. The first part is Smash, a hard-rocking punk song, then the instrumental version of Genocide, and the instrumental version of Come Out and Play. This was something that the band did often on their albums for their last track. After this album, they followed it up 3 years later with Ixnay on the Hombre. For some reason, I didn't buy this album when it came out. Plus, it wasn't as big as Smash, but it had a big hit with Gone Away, which is an interesting song, and that would be a good topic for another video. But after that, they released Americana, which is my favorite Offspring album. I talk about it in this video right here, so check that one out. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.